Hi, this is Roger. Thanks for dropping by. Several people have suggested that a good video might be going over my rescue plants, those that are left, because many have just been dumped, and why they're rescues and why I'm keeping them. I'm going to do it in parts. The first part is going to be today, which will only be mounts simply because I'm watering them. So I've got to get them down anyway. But it's going to be a little bit bitty on the grounds that most of my mounts are not rescued. So I'll be watering like mad to catch up and just stopping to have a chat and have a look at individual plants that are rescues. So we'll go from there. Okay, the first two are my Cuthbertsonia types. Now, the larger one is Cuthbertsonia crossed with Phalaenopsis, which is a larger version of virtually the same thing, but does grow larger canes. Quite honestly, is a more vigorous grower and slightly less difficult to look after. This is being rescued now due to my own mistreatment. This is a cloud forest dweller. Then it needs to stay in high humidity and constantly moist, and it's been drying out far too often through the winter simply because the frequency I water my mounts is greatly reduced this time of year, but this one shouldn't be, and that applies to the little Cuthbertsonia as well. It's just getting dry too often and staying dry more than it should. So this is just down to mistreatment on my part. I want to keep them because the blooms are gorgeous, and when it does bloom again, I'll say if with these two, the blooms last absolutely ages. They're an unusual shape, lovely bright colours in the main, so I'm rescuing them on the grounds that they've been mistreated. The rescue mechanism is simply a matter of watering these every day, and the only reason I won't water them every day is because I'm out, or because they're still wet from the day before, which can happen. You know, on a dull cold day with the low temperatures at night, it's not the temperatures that'll harm them. They're cloud forest dwellers. They don't need heat, but they need that constant moisture. So recovery of these is just me dealing with them rather than them being something wrong with the plant, if you see what I mean. But they're still rescues as a consequence. Now this Orangus, the only one I've got left, and I shouldn't have it left, this should be binned, but I'm going to give it a go because I'm confident this was not bugs, this was light damage. Yeah, this has affected quite a few plants during last year, and when I got this, I believe this came from a relatively shady environment and possibly with not a lot of airflow, and had settled into that environment, and then it got here, and where I placed it was far too bright, so that was like a sudden shock. And in addition to that, it was getting blasted with one of the circulating fans, which would have helped dehydrate it, you know. So I know what went wrong with it. Recovering it is just a matter of getting it to grow, but it will be years before it ever looks a good plant again. So I'm keeping this purely more as an experiment than anything else to see if I can recover it. But it's literally the only leaf that would be acceptable, although not good, is the top left one. Because although it's got some pitting, it's still got most of its colour. Whereas like the lower leaves, I mean that bottom leaf on the left can hardly do any work at all at the moment as far as photosynthesizing is concerned, because its cell structure has been completely destroyed over 2/3 of the leaf. And likewise with the other two, they're not good. It is growing now, does have a new leaf starting. Whether that will get up to full size or not, I don't know, because this will be having trouble feeding itself with the type of sugars and things that the photosynthesis produces. So it's more of an experiment, but it's definitely a rescue. Whether I make it with that one or not, I don't know. If I get problems with successive leaves, then it'll just go. Right, I'll do the story with the Lattouria types once, but won't repeat it. Effectively, as these were classed as continuous growers, they all got potted in a suitable mix for those type of plants. Unfortunately, at the time, I didn't appreciate the minimum sort of temperatures that these would normally grow in. And the first winter, it was far too cold for them, and the pot stayed too wet. So root loss began. Yeah? Unbeknown to me to any great extent, but this was followed by an extensive heat wave, and during those conditions they dropped a lot of their leaves. So they didn't have a good root system to support them and keep them hydrated in that heat, and the heat took off the leaves. They just dumped them, basically. So many canes that used to have leaves now haven't. Now I know that old cane's got 2 flowers on it. This is Polysema crossed with Aberrans. The new growths that it attempted last year were quite pathetic. There's 3 of them, one of which is already losing its 2 leaves, and the other 2 pairs of leaves are hopeless. But it does have a new growth. So it's in a state of rescue. Now this time of year, although it's got a new growth, it's not exactly growing actively. So I keep it quite dry. And when I water it, I don't get water on the base of the plant. I water the root area, not get water on the plant. The base of the plants on these are prone to rotting if they stay wet in cool temperatures. In their normal growing environment, they can get soaking wet and not worry about it. So yeah, a rescue, work in progress, and it should recover when we get to the warmer temperatures and it starts coming back into proper growth and putting up several new growths. Then it can start being fed heavier and get them going. But we'll see, work in progress. Now in the strict sense of the word, this isn't really a rescue. It just wasn't a good plant when I got it. Didn't have very good roots. This is Dendrobium Regina. On my wish list for a substantial plant, not another one like that, but nonetheless it has grown some roots. It's grown one right at the top of the mount, and it did produce a rather weak new growth, which is still actually growing. There is signs of a new leaf still pushing up on that. So all I can hope for with this is more new growths in the growing season and get it going a bit better. But it's going to take quite a long time before that gets anywhere near blooming size. But looking at that old cane that was on it when I got it, that cane has bloomed. I can see the remnants of the spikes. I don't think that's remnants of leaves. So once upon a time it was taken off a piece that had bloomed, but it was a tiny little piece. It's going to take quite a while to get that going. Now this one is an Sahara, and it's Evening Colours the Gloaming, and this struggled for years in a pot. I got a feeling that when I got it, it actually had Fusarium, but that was prior to the days where I even knew about it. As part of routine program treatments, it would have been treated. So if it did have, then hopefully it's stopped it now. The reason this is being rescued is the pop-up in the top right-hand corner, and the fact that I'd probably never get it again. So didn't do well in a pot, never did well in a pot, so we thought we'll chuck it on a mount. And the little growth to the right was weak, but the new growth there is quite strong. Still not quite as large as the largest old pseudobulb, but is fatter and plumper, and maintained its 2 leaves. It's now started a new growth effectively from the bulb behind, and it may push out another new growth once we get to the better weather, longer days and all that sort of stuff. So we may get another 2, and in theory it's possible it might shoot out at the other end as well. So the more new growths I can get, the better, the stronger the root system will be. It has grown some reasonable roots. Although these roots are up the right hand side of the mount, I'm pretty confident they come from the left hand end of the plant. They've just extended out in that direction. But given the size of the plant and the number of leaves, it's got enough roots to look after itself now, and it will grow more. The more new growths it gets, the better the root system will be. So it's effectively rescued, really, but it's still not right. So I still class it as recovering, I think we'll call it, rather than trying to rescue it, because I don't think it's dying now, it's just not in a good state. But I think it will be. I think by the end of this next growing season that's going to look quite a good plant. Some of the older leaves will have dropped probably and be replaced by nice bright green ones that won't get too much light and go all pale and wishy-washy. So coming on, that one. Now I'm filming this one. This, strictly speaking, isn't a rescue plant. I got this in the Christmas raffle from Milan, Wessex Orchid Society, and it had some roots. You know, I wasn't complaining. It was actually a raffle prize rather than, you know, anything else. But I just wanted to show that because that one was an experiment. So that got initially the zombie moss, and then it had some live sphagnum moss put on the top. It's not going to make it, because it dries out. This time of year it dries and sphagnum moss just goes brown. Strictly speaking, if that was kept constantly wet, the sphagnum moss would come back to life, the live stuff. So it would come back green again, but it's not working. It's not a success on this type of mount with the watering frequency I've got. That would have done better having the other type of live moss, and that seems to survive going dry for a day or two. This doesn't. But nonetheless, I can see a new root growing off that tiny little growth. So it's going to come back into growth, and we should see some growth on it. I haven't got a clue what to expect as far as blooming is concerned. It's a species I know nothing about, but yeah, we'll see how it does. Not a true rescue, just a plant that I haven't had long that needs to get going, if you know what I mean. But yeah, the live sphagnum moss on a mount, not very successful at all. Now this plant, when it bloomed, most people agreed that it's probably got a virus. The blooms were badly distorted, and basically, obviously that looks a bit silly on that mount like that. That's because there was a plant of almost equal size heading off to the left where the big hole is, where it got ceremoniously cut off and ripped off of the mount to get rid of what was the worst part. I'm not saying I'm rescuing it. What I'm doing is seeing what it does next, because it's currently got 4 new growths pushing out. You wouldn't expect a virus plant to have that amount of vigour, would you? But nonetheless, they're there. So I'm going to let them grow. It's not in quarantine as such, but it is separated. I don't allow it to physically touch any other plants, and I do water it totally separately with its own water. So I don't get water that runs off of this on any other plants, and it's allowed to completely drip and stop dripping before it gets put back where it lives, because otherwise it might drip on something below it. So it's being taken care of. I'm not saying it's being rescued, because if it's got a virus there is no rescue, there is no cure. But I'm letting it grow to see what it does, and it might stay long enough for those new growths to bloom, and that will be the deciding factor the next time it blooms. We shall see. But with 4 new growths, I'm just going to let it go and see what happens. This mounted Phalaenopsis is being rescued purely for curiosity reasons. It is a Phalaenopsis that has a tendency to grow new plants from the base. That's in its makeup, so that's nothing unusual. The fact that it pushed that side growth out, the fact that it didn't grow is a little unusual. But nonetheless, the crown rotted on this, and then it shot out from the crown again. So effectively that is like a basal growth, but from the centre of the plant. And I'm keeping it just for curiosity reasons to see what the hell it's going to do next. Some of the older leaves are a bit manky, and the new leaves coming out of that central growth I don't believe are going to get up anywhere near full size, but I'm interested to see what it does next. And it's also in a place where it doesn't get in my way. So it just gets watered with the other mounted Phalaenopsis to see what it's going to do next. Who knows? I mean, it's got some roots, and some of those are actively growing. And, yeah, curiosity, nothing more. I'm not fussed if I lose it, although it does have very pretty blooms. But, you know, it's the sort of Phalaenopsis, if I really wanted to, I could probably replace it with something incredibly similar. But that wouldn't get done. If the plant goes, then it will go, it won't get replaced. But it'd be interesting to see what it does next. I'm curious. Right, these 3 Tulumneas are classed as rescues, although I think they might be able to come off the list now. These are 3 of the 5 what were called the Christmas Tulumneas, because I got them as a set of 5, not the Christmas do just gone, the one before that. So I've had them just over a year now, and they would not grow. 2 of them were lost, so we've got 3 left, and they might be able to come off the list. I'd still class that as a rescue, even though it has pushed up 1 reasonable growth, but what it has done is pushed out some roots. So I think it's going to be okay now. When we get the better weather, that one should push on. And that is, these have all got the label with the nursery on. So this is Jarrac Firm Brown Brush, and it looks like it's going to be quite attractive if it ever gets to blooming size. Who knows how long that's going to be. These were young plants, these 3. The 2 more mature ones didn't make it. And again, this one is doing better. The latest growth is not a bad growth. A lot of the roots failed, they didn't take, but it does have another new growth just starting. So I think it's going to make it okay. I wouldn't class it as up and running yet. And that's Jarrac Firm Hickory. And that really does look like it's going to be attractive if we get there. That's all I can say with these. This is another one. This is Jarrac Rainbow Soft Pink, and I really do like the look of those blooms with that colour. They could be tiny, they could be quite large, who knows. But this one's sort of coming on now. It has actually produced 2 new growths during last year, but they're not good. They're not as good as they should be. There are some roots, including a couple of just about active roots, but again, given the better weather, that might pull on. Now these just were very poor quality young plants when they arrived, so they immediately went in as rescues, and I'm not willing to take them out of that category for a while yet, but probably part way through this coming growing season they may push on quite well. They're not going down anymore, but they're not growing with the vigour Tulumneas normally grow with, compared with some of my others that are all in the same circumstances. So these have got to get going a bit better before I class them as fully rescued. These could pull on well enough in this coming growing season that they actually bloom. There's no reason why they shouldn't. Tulumneas can bloom on quite young plants, but they need to have enough strength behind them to be able to do it. So we'll see how those 3 progress. Right, this one will be a good example of the difference between a rescue and what is, for me, a new plant that isn't established yet. That doesn't mean it's a rescue. A rescue for me is something that was not very good when I got it and is still trying to get going, or one that was okay once and has gone downhill, therefore needs to be rescued. This is just yet to establish itself properly. It's a new plant. It didn't have great roots on it, it had some. And the latest new growth down the sort of bottom right at the moment, sticking out there, doesn't look like it's going to progress. But nonetheless, it's got a bud on it. So I'm yet to determine what category this comes into. I suspect when the warmer weather comes, being a Lattouria type, it will get going a bit better and start growing some more roots and some more new growths. So it's not strictly speaking a rescue, it's just a new plant that's not yet established. If by the end of the next growing season it hasn't, then it'll be a rescue, but not yet. This, however, is a rescue, because once it was good and now it isn't. Another Lattouria type, so I've already done the story on why with the Lattouria types. This one is trying to recover. It's just managed to put up a single new growth. That's not going to get anywhere near full size, and it is the only one, and it still has a poor root system. But it's not in its ideal world at the moment. It needs a bit of warmth. Yeah, so hopefully it will, but not yet. Same story again, Lattouria type, although this one didn't go downhill as much as some of the others, and this one is making a good effort to recover. So this one is going to make it. It's grown some roots and it's got 2 new growths. It will now pull on and get back to some sort of normality. We had a look at that on Sunday, I think. That's even got a tiny little spike trying to push out. Maybe more than one. If you look at the central cane now, at the very top of it, it's starting to swell. Those could be blooming spikes. That's the cane with the single leaf, manky leaf. Anyway, that's recovering. But out of the Lattouria types, that's the one that's putting a bit of effort in at the moment. So we'll see how that goes on. Same again, another Lattouria type. When this one was taken out of its pot to give it a chance, it responded badly. It was going down anyway, but what this one's doing is attempting to put up new growths and failing miserably. If you look at the top plant, right in the centre of the shot now, that is a new growth that's just aborted. And down here, that out to the left with the shriveled leaf was a new growth. Alongside it was the previous attempt. So this is not recovering, it's just basically failing. Now again, maybe with some warmer weather it may pick up, and I haven't got a clue what it is because the tag's been lost, but I know what it is in my notes on the grounds that I made a note that it went into 2 plants when it was mounted. So, but it's just not, that one will not get going. It keeps failing the new growths, and that could just be that it's in a poor state and it's cold. So once it gets warmer, it might start to succeed with the new growths. Both of these bits have not got a bad root system, but they just will not grow at the moment. They won't get going. So that one is a true recovery, and it might not make it. Now this little Cattleya hybrid, it's debatable whether it's being rescued or just a young plant. It's difficult to tell. But its pattern of growth was it headed off to the top right. So that growth with the sheath was the latest growth, and that's where I'd have expected a new growth to push out. And yet it pushed out one in the middle of the plant. It has got some roots, but some of them have failed to keep growing. So they're there, but they're certainly not actively growing at the moment. And if you look at the roots of the base of that one with the sheath, those new roots failed miserably. So I'm not sure what this one's up to. I don't know what size it should be or what it's supposed to be doing. It was a gift, but it's not dead yet, although that growth out there is going. That's an old seedling growth. I won't worry about that one at the moment, but the latest growth is now in the middle of the plant, and I'd highly suspect another new growth to push out on the right, as that was its growth area last time round. But you know, I almost expected to see some buds when I saw a sheath, but it didn't happen. It may not be blooming size, who knows, but it's not doing well. It's not doing as well as it should be, but at least it's not dead and it's not going downhill. It's just a bit static, but with a new growth it could pull on. Now this little Cattleya hybrid is also in a similar position, but there are subtle differences. Again, obviously a very young plant when I got it. It could be a miniature, but with that number of bulbs I'd say it was a young plant. The latest new growth is the one to the right with the spotty leaves. Grossly undersized and not actively doing anything. But at the base of it, it did push out a new root. Singular, one. It does have some roots. They're not good. There's another actively growing one at the very base of the mount there. So that's just not doing much. Now maybe its next new growth will push on better, but that is just not doing very well. It just won't get going. This is a lot of the reasons why I don't buy young plants, especially in the Cattleya range, because they can take an awful long time to get up to blooming size, and they've got to be well looked after when they're young plants. And I can't put extra care into individual plants. They all get treated the same. I haven't got that sort of time or patience, come to think of it. But, you know, it may push on. It may not make it. It's not in a good state. And the last one for today is the Dendrobium Ladejessiae. This is the mother plant that all the kikis were taken off of. Whether this is a true rescue or not depends on what it does next. Because what it did last year was bloomed nicely and started some new growths, but not many. And then it went absolutely berserk and produced kikis all over the plant. Well, obviously that's where the plant's going to put its energy, into those new growths and the kikis. But there were so many kikis, I think it put a lot of effort into getting those going. They were promptly taken off, and it seemed to upset the plant, having the kikis removed. So I don't know what this is going to do next. It has a base there, and that's where it needs to push some new growths out. There's strong new growth up to the right at the top, then produced kikis, 3 of them, which rooted onto the mount. So they were left. Those, and that cane, could bloom. I don't know. We shall have to wait and see. But some of the canes are shriveled now and will serve no purpose at all. Things like that curly shaped one out to the right, that's gone. That's of no use. And again with that curled one to the left there. And several down here around the base as well, or around the other base. So it needs those taken off to tidy it, if nothing else, and then see what it does next. Now if it starts to shoot out from the base with some strong growths, then it's recovered. But at the moment I don't know. So this is a wait and see. It may well bloom in a couple of places, but I don't think it's going to be anything like the previous blooming. It's just not. In fact, there's a little bit of green shooting out of, I'll put it down there. Now what's that? Is that going to be a bud, or is that going to be a kiki? Who knows? Time will tell. So I'm not sure whether that's a rescue plant or not. Quite honestly, with the mass of kikis, which are here, that was convenient, yeah, which are doing okay, I might just replace that with that and just get rid of that. Took a while to get it to blooming size, but the first year it was blooming size, it didn't get the winter treatment properly because it goes back a while. When it did, it bloomed. But these are to grow on next year. This is the kikis that came off, and I've kept them growing through the winter. You can see I've just watered them. So I'm not giving these any element of rest whatsoever. They're being kept green with some active root growth. These should pick up when the better weather comes. So we shall see. So we might end up with both. We might end up with just the new bits and discard the older bit. Time will tell. Okay, that's it for the mounts then. Picking out what I call rescues, some that were and perhaps now aren't, and some that some that haven't been filmed may become rescues down the line. Who knows? Things change. But that's where I am with the mounts. Some of those that are classed as rescues are really nothing more than young plants that just haven't really got going yet. Others were growing well and now aren't, or are starting to. So there's quite a different set in there. I hope that gives you a bit of an insight into the sort of things that can go wrong and why, and in some cases what you can do to change things, like with the Lattourias. Most of those came out of pots and went on mounts, and they seem to be doing better. But then this one over here got left in its pot, and it's doing fine. So it's often difficult to tell. There are other rescues around in pots, but I'll do the pots as a different session. So that's where we are with that, and I'll see you next time. I've got work to do.